Right, so as Natasha said, I'm Adam Lindsay. My colleague Josh is here as well from Access Screening. We provide automated compliance tools that allow organisations to control their screening and keep things in-house, putting their own stamp on the way that they choose to background screen. So we're going to talk about the importance of candidates' experience and user experience and the benefits of automation today. So we're going to cover a few key areas. What is candidate screening? Obviously, we're not going to try and teach you to suck eggs, but we'll have a broad overview of what we're looking at, why it's so important, different ways you can be screening, how you use automation, what kind of checks you can be doing and why you should be doing them as well, best practice and things to be aware of, avoiding common pitfalls that recruiters tend to make, not everybody, I'm sure you're all wonderful at your screening processes, and then we'll take some key takeaways as well, and then we can discuss anything in a roundtable afterwards. So, a brief introduction. Look, with over 3/4 of applications containing inaccurate information and the CIPD estimating the cost to recruit a skilled worker is over £7,000, although I'd suggest there's probably further hidden costs if you analyse it, it's important that you get your screening programme right. It should support an effective onboarding journey. It's not just a question of getting a couple of background checks, as we'll go into. If you are recruiting people who aren't suitable for roles, perhaps they've not got the right skills or characteristics to be a benefit to your organisation, it can be detrimental, resulting in fines, antisocial behaviour in the workplace, loss of reputation, increased staff churn. So it's important that you take time to understand this process and get it as nailed down as you possibly can. We've done some various stats which we'll look at later on, but a study showed that a candidate who goes through a structured onboarding process is 69% more likely to stay with an organisation for 3 years. I mean, I'm not sure how they established that stat, but it highlights the importance of candidate experience in this. Working with automation, there's lots of different things you can do and there's loads of options with screening, but what we found with our clients, they've got more control over the process, they can improve the candidate experience, reduce the time to hire, adhere to all the legislative compliance as well, and just have more of their own process while screening. So let's go further onto it. What is background screening? I'm not going to do a War and Peace verse on this. For me, it comes in various ways. It should, could, and usually does support part of a candidate journey and onboarding. It's not the Spanish Inquisition. You know, not every candidate's going to falsify claims either, but it only takes one bad hire to potentially cause detriment to the organisation. For me, what you're trying to achieve is a holistic view of a candidate's background. So on the one hand, you can be sure they are who they say they are, and the other, they've done what they say they've done. Ultimately, you want to be safeguarding the business to minimise bad hires, optimise compliance, and it all boils down to a return on investment delivered by your screening programme. So it's not just a separate piece, it's all about the journey from application through to offer, making sure you're protecting everybody in the chain. So screening is probably more relevant that people understand, maybe not within this room, given the nature of what most of us do, but from the cashiers who served you in the shop recently, from the taxi driver who took you here this morning, or the solicitor who helped you buy the dream house, or the teachers who are with our children now. There's all a set of compliance they will go through, but every single person employed in the UK will have to go through some form of compliance, be it a right to work check or employment history. So it is a massive topic that often gets overlooked or put to one side. Key reasons why organisations screen. This is not an exhaustive list. Firstly, you may need to make sure the candidates that are coming in have the right skill set, the right assets to be a benefit to your organisation. That's a massive one. But also when they're coming through the doors, you want to try and retain them, and that goes hand in hand with a positive experience. So make sure you get the right people in, keep them, and then they're going to help your business grow. Of course, you want to comply with legislation. You might be directly regulated, you might do a certain set of checks, you might be just doing right to work, but there's always a legislative stance that you need to look at. You want to protect the business. Now, employees is one element, you know, antisocial behaviour, negative experiences in the workplace, but then your processes, your practices, you might have access to sensitive data, your customers might need protecting. Whatever it is, you need to protect the organisation and take steps to do that as well. You want to improve the quality of hires, as I've mentioned, but also reduce your time to hire too, if you can. Then a reputation kit is part of this as well. If things go wrong, you can get into the press. So you've got an opportunity to protect your organisation that side, but also think about the communication going out, references going out, candidate applications. It's a chance to promote your reputation as well, make you look like a caring, forward-thinking employer. So if it does go wrong, it can be quite severe. We've seen some pretty high-profile cases in the press over the last few years. Byron Burger's had a big right-to-work issue. But there's been large recruitment agencies who employed finance directors without checking their qualifications. That person then went on to spend over £300,000 on self-indulgence and shoes, for one. It doesn't mean to say that person had, even if they had the right qualifications, might not have stolen, but if they checked them in the first place, they probably wouldn't have got the job and they would have protected the organisation. On the same token, we've seen large logistics companies who just took as gospel that their employee, when they said they didn't have a criminal record, they just said, yeah, that's okay, you've not got one. They didn't check it. That employee delivered something to someone's house. The nature of their offence was really severe, and they offended again with that person on their doorstep. So it's not as simple as just saying, right, have you had a criminal background? If you're not checking it, you can't take any action and you can't protect your organisation. So make sure you're putting steps in place to stop things like that happening. A good key step, or a first key step, is to understand how you're regulated. So take some time to understand the different departments. You might have a finance department who are governed by the FCA, so you need checks in there. You might have direct regulation. Perhaps you've got people working with children or vulnerable adults. You might be under government protection with BPSS or BS 7858 with security. Understand what compliance sets you've got that are relevant for your organisation, but also for your clients perhaps as well, and detail what checks you can do, put processes in place, and protect everybody. So as an employer, or as employers, which we all are and have been, you've got a duty of care, of course, to your staff, to shareholders, the general public. It is all about making sure all the stakeholders and anyone in your sphere of influence is protected along the way. So some stats on why candidate screening is so important, or candidate experience is so important. I think it's imperative anyway for a candidate experience to be good from the very first application through to offer, because it makes you stand out as an effective employer. But some stats that we've taken that show why it's so important as well. I mean, 38% of candidates were more likely to stay with the business if their experience is positive. Again, good. 72% of candidates share their negative experience online with someone else. That for me is a bit more damning. With social media, things like Glassdoor, if they've had a negative experience, it can paint the wrong picture for your organisation. 83% of candidates say negative experience can change their minds about a role or a company they once liked. That applies to recruitment, but it applies to consumerism as well. You know, opinions can change, and you want to make sure that your brand is on point at all times. Those who have had a positive experience are 54% more productive. I'm not quite sure how they measured that again, but it's a good stat to show that the benefit of having a good candidate experience can help your organisation. We've already said the stat about 69% of people more likely to stay for 3 years or more, but then 60% of employers have had negative feedback. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I think negative feedback can be a positive because then you can act and improve things moving forward. But background checks is one thing, screening is part of that, but it should all be part of one joined up candidate journey from the very start with your applicant tracking system or however they apply through to offer. It should be one neat journey that the candidate, but also your team internally can go through and have an effective process. So where do we go from here? If you're going to screen, you've got a few options. You can keep things in-house and have a manual process, and there's no harm in doing that. Things you've got to consider: do your team have the relevant training and understanding to carry out checks? If you need third-party checks, things like criminal checks, credits, driving licenses, where are you getting that information from? Have you got a central space to store that information? Can you easily get reports? Is it a nice journey for the candidate? Have a think about that. Is your application process clunky and paper-based? Have you got spreadsheets here, there, and everywhere in different systems? Could it be improved? And if it could, you may want to look at other options. Benefits of keeping it in-house or using your own knowledge and experience is that you have control and you dictate the process. So for me, that's very important. If you want to outsource, that's an option as well. You've got the fully outsourced options with managed service providers. We work with many ourselves. They use our software to help run their businesses. There's definite benefits of that. There is also some potential pitfalls. It can be quite expensive. That's one element as well. Candidate experience, if you've not chosen a partner, someone who works with you and understands your process and what you're trying to achieve, it can be a disjointed process for the candidate. It might feel like they're getting interrogated by an outside body, so you want to make sure it joins up with your candidate journey and experience. Often you have a lack of control when working with a managed service provider, limited access to reports. What we found as well, for some of them, not all, because some are great, some aren't, with a call centre environment, when they're KPI'd on 3 or 4 calls to get hold of candidates or referees, they may stop at the 3rd or 4th call and return back to you an incomplete file. From their end, they've met their KPIs. From your end, you've got nothing and paid for it. So If you are going to work with an outsourced agency or an outsourced partner, make sure that they understand your business, make sure it's going to be someone who implements your process and policy in that. And there is, of course, other ways, which automation, which we can help with, but there are other options out there. I think for me, this is the new way of screening, and I've worked in screening for too long, to be fair. It allows you to put your own process and policy and procedure into a system. You're using your experience and your knowledge, which is far more than any other managed service provider would be about your business, and putting that into a platform, putting the rules in place and letting it do the admin heavy tasks for you, but we can talk about that as we go along. So it's almost a hybrid approach in a way. So we can move forward. So benefits of automation, there's lots of different things. For me, the biggest thing is to put your own stamp on it, to implement the way you want things to look and feel with your brand, your logo, your wording, making the candidate experience as useful as possible. But having the ability to pull off reports is second to none, really. I mean, you want to look at the where you're going right and things that are going well, but also look at where things are going wrong and improve process moving forward. Look how you're performing against your SLAs and what steps you can take to improve that. Maybe you're getting audited by a legislative body, the CQC or Ofsted, or the Home Office are coming in. It gives you the ability to pull off reports easily and control that yourself. Because you're not paying for people to do these checks, you're using your own resource, of course, the cost with that, it keeps your transactional checks low and the cost of that because it's your system to use rather than someone else running it for you. So it gives you the ability of keeping it in-house, but also having the tools of a managed service provider at your fingertips to go through background screening. And then within that, you can match a whole structure and hierarchy of your business, manage any documents that you need, things like right to work checks. The biggest instance of failure of right to work don't come from the first check that you do, they come from the expiry date being missed for a BRP card or a document there. So having a system that can alert you of anything that needs rechecking, perhaps it's DBS, driving licenses, right to work, whatever it might be, is essential in my opinion. Also simple things like document management. You know, if the candidate's going through different steps, they've applied for a job with an applicant tracking system or perhaps online, and they're going through this and they're filling out another form here, another form there. What if your screening program or your onboarding form could have things like your contracts in there that were signed electronically, or T's and C's or handbooks or working time regulation forms? If you can distribute your documents in one area, so it's a nice welcome pack for the candidate and one seamless journey, I think you'll see some improvements on how you work. Right to work as well. When looking at software and automation, there's apps available now that you can use. I think inside this room we've probably got a fair few people who understand right to work. I think outside of HR, recruitment and legal, there might be some limited understanding of what needs to be done and how to comply with the Home Office list and get your statutory legal defence. So it's important now that even non-expert users can go through what they need to do, know what documentation is acceptable from which country of origin, and then follow a process. With apps now, you can replace the old process of getting a photocopy, stamping it and putting it away. It can be done automatically and fed through to systems with an automatic electronic date and timestamp with alerts for reminders as well. So nice ways of doing things. Obviously these days are all mobile optimized and cloud-based as well. So it's just a different way of approaching screening, but using your skills, your experience to achieve your goals. So what kind of checks can you do? Lots really. Some are dictated by regulation. I think the first key step is to know the candidate is who they say they are. You want to verify their identity. So collect all the relevant documentation, utility bills, driving licenses, passports, whatever it might be. Make sure they're genuine and valid. If you want to do further things like you're doing an electoral roll search against their address history using elements of a credit inquiry, you can do that. Make sure they are who they say they are. You meet them, and then cross-reference the information they provide and store that. If you get this done early, if you're doing things like criminal record checks or third-party checks, it gives you more control over the process. So really key one, start with identity. That goes hand in hand with right to work, although right to work isn't an identity check, it's the legality to work in the UK. Getting this right is imperative. The consequences of failure in right to work are quite severe. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but fines of up to £20,000 per employee, potential prison sentences, disqualification from public procurement contracts, not great, okay? As I've mentioned before, the instances of failure tend to come from the secondary checks, but make sure you've got a process installed internally that you can go through the Home Office list, get your statutory legal defence, make sure it's checked, make sure it's updated. If you get it right and you get it right early, it minimises the employee from disruption and minimises the organisation potential hazardous problems, as I've mentioned, but you don't want things getting into the press that you've missed or failed a Home Office audit or you've been employing illegal workers. So get that done and get it done early, perhaps at interview stage, and then if needs be, purge the data. Obviously you need to make sure you're GDPR compliant within that. But wherever you want to do it, either interview or offer stage, make sure it's done before they start work, make sure it's auditable, and make sure you can track expiry dates as well. Then you can go a lot further. So screening in a way is quantifying a candidate. You meet them, you judge their skills, you see if they're a pleasant person to get on with and whether they're going to fit in and with the culture of your business. But what you're doing is using data to then quantify the other side of it with their employment history, their qualifications, their identity. So if you want, you can look at criminal background checks. If you're in a directly regulated environment, they're working with children or vulnerable adults, then you might do an enhanced disclosure. If you're under the FCA, you might do a standard disclosure. But you can do basic criminal disclosures on absolutely anybody. There's no restriction. So it's a good way of establishing honesty and integrity. A lot of our clients implement a question in their applicant tracking system that says, have you had a criminal record or an unspent conviction in the last 5 years? And if the answer's no, and then they're doing a criminal record check and it comes back that they actually have had something, then it's a red flag, isn't it? They've lied about their history, and then you need to talk about that. If the answer's yes and it comes back yes, then great, you've been honest. It might still be a red flag, but it's something to discuss. So put steps in place so you can understand the honesty and integrity of a candidate. If you want to go further as well, you can look at credit inquiries, directorship searches. Social media is more popular these days, certainly for senior appointments. I'm looking at things like racist comments or homophobic comments online. I used to think originally that, well, if you wanted to hide it, you would, but you'd be surprised what comes out in reports, and people are just unaware what they're putting online and what effect that can have. So just have a think about what you want to achieve. You've got to make it relevant and reasonable for the candidates, but you can go a lot further to find out where they've been and what they've done. So certainly look at data checks and criminal records if you can. Qualification checks, alarmingly, it's probably the biggest area of fraud in background screening. We did a little test internally for our Access World events where we purchased a degree certificate online. You can even get nectar points for it, which is a bit strange. But stats on the screen there, 40% of job applicants falsify academic qualifications. I think because they probably think it's not going to get checked. They change a B to an A or a 2-1, a 2-2 to a 2-1. And it might not be role relevant, so they continue to do that. But for me, if it's role relevant, you should be checking professional qualifications and educational background as well. If it's not, then it's still worth considering whether you're going to verify a certificate, because just because they provide one, it might not be genuine and valid. But again, it's honesty and integrity. It's up to you how you do it, but certainly it's a good way to understand, are they being truthful about what's on their background history. And I'm sure, candidates certainly embellish CVs. LinkedIn and CVs are potentially marketing documents, so you need to make a process where you're cross-referencing that as well. When we're looking at employment history, it's changed over the years. I think when I started working in screening, we used to provide investigative references, which are full dossiers of a candidate's background. I think now, most will admit in the room, it's a tick box exercise, and you get granular information back from HR and recruitment, dates of employment, reason for leaving, would you rehire, perhaps salary, but probably not. I will agree that in certain industries, perhaps education with safer recruitment and a little bit in health and care, you might get a bit more information, but actually it's very limited now, and you're quantifying a timeline of where they've been. So this is what you need to do. You need to make it easy for a candidate, you need to make it easy for the referee to provide information as well. Understand what a reference is to you, how far you go back, how many years you want to look at, what's your minimum number, what gaps do you look at in CVs, do your regulatory bodies need you to look at gaps in employment as well. So put the rules in place, understand what a red flag is to you, and then start building an employment history. Cross-reference that with what they put on the CV, cross-reference that with what's on LinkedIn, and discuss it. Now, you are meeting these people, they will talk through their experience. We're not accusing everyone of fraudulent claims, but you're just making sure they've been where they've been and they've done what they've done. If it's a week out of date with their employment history, for me, it's not the end of the world, people forget. But if there's 3 to 6 months that they've not accounted for, what were they doing? What were they trying to hide? So just build this timeline so you can get a good picture of what candidates are and what they're going to bring to your organisation. So best practice in screening. Across any organisation, there's probably numerous policies in different departments. So I think you need to understand some key things, really. The requirements internally, understand every role you've got from entry level through to chief exec or director level. Put a risk matrix in place based on seniority and access to data or role requirements, and put checks in place to protect that. Put the rules behind that as well, so when you're coming to do background checks, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and just build a matrix across the business that's going to achieve your screening needs. Then internally, you need to understand that who's accountable for the checks, who's making decisions to hire, who's updating policies. Who's running the process ultimately? Are you communicating things internally? Are people aware of lead times, of potential cost? Are candidates aware of the process from start to finish? Have you communicated to them early that they're going through a screening program? So you just need to make sure things are clear, consistent, make it organisation-wide, and have the same set of objectives that you're looking to achieve. With regard to your policy, you might have GLOAT, you might be screening in a global environment, so can you get checks from there? But in your contracts of employment and handbooks, is it listed that you can take action if a background check comes back and it's negative? There's no point doing them if you can't take action when it comes back. So make sure your contracts are up to date, make sure your policy's there, make sure you're dealing with any third-party data and information and you've got information stored there, GDPR as well. Get it all in place, get it updated and make sure it's someone's responsibility to be accountable for that. And then have a think about what you do internally. As we move forward, people are tending to look at automation software for the whole process, using applicant tracking systems here, HR platforms there. Do you need things to link in and have a seamless journey for your users? Do you need access to third-party checks? Understand what you use and what you want to achieve through automation and software as well. And then reporting as well. You need to be able to satisfy both internal and external stakeholders. So make sure you can get the information you need if you're audited, or if your managers or anyone who works with you needs to see a report from a candidate before they start work. It's just having access to data. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And that's pretty much it. Looking through the automated screening process, dead simple, straightforward. A candidate applies for a role, ATS or online. They come into interview, you've communicated what they should be bringing, so they'll bring their documentation. Take copies of that documentation, either perhaps with an app or in a manual process, whatever you do. For me, I would do this early, right to work and ID at this stage. You're going to decide if they're going to work for you, you'll offer them a job, subject to background checks. You then engage with a platform if needs be, or a partner, whatever you're doing. Candidate will get the link, provide the background check information, and give consent for the checks to be done. Consent is key. You always need to capture your consent and store that consent so you can manage that data accordingly. Once they've given consent, a system like ours will then automate the process. So it will fire off checks to the DBS, to the credit reference agencies. These transactional checks need very little manual input from your end. It will then automate the process for referees, chasing them, alerting you if dates come back wrong, job titles don't match, and giving you the tools to, just to assimilate what red flags are and where the candidates are failing. That allows you to spend time on talent management and making decisions on time to hire rather than admin-based tasks. So it's just a nice way of doing it. Finally, you get left with a report, which you can share internally. So it's just a new way of approaching screening. Avoiding common pitfalls, make sure you know your regulations, make sure how it's going to affect that, make sure you understand the consequence of failure across the business. You don't want to lose candidates through a clunky application process, so make sure it's effective for them, but also make sure your users internally have got a decent journey to go through. We've got lots of resources available, which we're going to show on the screen now, but ultimately take steps to understand your business, the candidate journey, and put things in place for screening. If you do want any resources, we'll share these slides. We've got lots of things online, webinars, checklists, white papers. Feel free to have a look at them. We also do some events with the Home Office, so if you want to come and speak with them, come and listen to what they've got to say. Some quite interesting things that they bring up on right to work, and we often do those. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.